Shalom, everybody. We are live here on the Yishai Fleischer Show. We're going to be discussing something that we don't usually discuss so much here on my program, which is American politics. Not something that I always focus on because I think that my job is to bring you Israel. And we have really a world expert on both Israel issues, but also how Israel issues are done and perceived from abroad, especially the United States of America. And somebody who's put out an amazing book just now, his name is Josh Reinstein, and the book, which I'm holding right here, and you can see on the screen as well, is called Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel. We'll be talking to him in just a minute. I'm just going to wait for everybody to join us here on Facebook, on Periscope, and on YouTube, all going live at the same time. Josh, get ready. We're about to rock and roll in just another minute. So we have people coming in. We already have Shalom Revelator saying shalom, and a few other people. He's actually on Periscope. It's fun to see somebody coming in for Periscope, and people do join up. So I'm just going to wait for another second. We're going to be discussing this book and also these elections, and we're going to be talking about it no holds barred. So the issues that are out there are going to be opened up here on the Yishai Fleischer Show today with Josh Reinstein. All right, I see Simone says hello from Johannesburg. That's great. Hi, Simone. How are you? We're just about to begin in another few seconds. So we're going to be talking about the issues that I think a lot of people want to talk about, but some of people are embarrassed to talk about, which is this Trump re-election and the real feelings about it. So there's a lot of tension about revealing your real feelings, I think, unless you want to rip somebody on social media where you can say whatever. All right, just about to go. 8 more seconds. Linda says shalom from Bourne, Texas, USA. Josh, is that somewhere you're from? Bourne, Texas? Is that somewhere you're from?
I'm from Big D, Dallas, Texas, actually.
All right. Okay, and Alice is on the right coast in Maryland. Okay, so I think we're ready to begin, and let's start. All right, good. My good friend, tour guide Aaron, is saying shalom from Beersheba, and I see somebody named Olivera says Serbia. From Serbia, that's right, from Serbia. And folks for saying shalom from New York. So here we go. We're starting the show right now. Shalom, everybody, and welcome to the Yishai Fleischer Show. And we're broadcasting live on Facebook, on Twitter, Periscope, and on YouTube, and, of course, on the Land of Israel Network. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I don't usually talk about in my show because my show is about Israel. That's what I think you want from me, and that's what I want to be talking about, which is Israel, the state of Israel, the biblical heartland of Israel, the life of Israel, the people of Israel. But you know what, folks? You can't deny it. The United States is the soft power hegemon in the world, and it's also one of the great military powers and one of the great economies in this world. In simple terms, it's a superpower that has incredible cultural, military, and economic impact on the world. Its policies make a difference for the world. Its moral stance has an impact on the world. And it competes with Russia and China, certainly with China, and other entities, local entities, and other powers that want to vie for being top dog or at least close by or at least influence. So sometimes when it comes to an American election, it's important for us to actually get into it. And I do think that this election is very important. And before I get to our guests, I just want to tell you a little story. This has happened to me many times, but the story that I'm telling you right now is something that you may have felt yourself. I give talks in synagogues and in other institutions around the United States and the world. And people come up to me. I was in a synagogue in Long Island, a conservative synagogue, and people came up to me and they said in hushed tones, I support the president. I support President Trump. I said, great. Well, his policies are good for Israel. Why are you whispering? Well, he says, I can't say it out loud because I would basically be excised. I would be thrown into cherem, what's the word for cherem? I would be outcast in my community if I let people know how I really feel. And I feel like that's a real problem. It's a real problem in democracy. It's a real problem in community. And it just shows that there's an atmosphere of polarization and even of fear. Our guest today that really has made a great career of telling people what is truthfully in their heart and opening it up to everybody is Josh Reinstein. Now, Josh has a wonderful bio because he's done some really cool stuff here in Israel and for the Jewish world. As I said, Josh Reinstein is his name, and he's been the director of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus and the Allies Foundation since 2004. He's the president of the Israel Allies Foundation. He's a producer of a hit TV show called Israel Now News. It's a half-an-hour weekly news magazine show that millions of viewers around the world see. And he's also the purveyor of a marketing firm. He grew up in Dallas, Texas, graduated from University of Western Ontario, served as a gunner in the 188th Armored Corps here in Israel, and has been named one of the 50 most influential Jews by the Jerusalem Post. And what this bio doesn't tell you is that what Josh Reinstein does is that he speaks to world leaders, world parliaments, and connects with those folks who, because of their Christian faith, love Israel, and also conservative understandings and leanings who love Israel. But not only that, because he's bipartisan both in the Knesset and around the world, he's just looking for people that are in parliaments, in places of power, that want to connect and support the story of Israel. And that has made him extremely powerful and influential. Josh Reinstein, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Hey, thank you, Yishai, for that warm introduction.
You got it, and you deserve it. Look, Josh, let's get right to the nub of the issue. How big deal is this U.S. election? I mean, right before the election, you put out this book, which is called Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel, which I guess, from reading it and from understanding the title, it means that you think that this election and the Trump presidency is an important one.
Absolutely. I think this upcoming election is critical. I mean, they always say every election is the biggest election to that date. I think this one is really an important one if Israel is your main focus. And I think that also if Judeo-Christian values is an interest to you or something that's a focus of you in your life, if you're a devout Jew or Christian, I think that people need to really pay attention to what's happening in the United States of America. United States of America is the superpower in the world, and as goes America, goes the rest of the world. And I think that this is going to be a very, very important election coming up.
Okay, so it's an important election because, let's get to it. You know, Trump, from a policy point of view, has done things that are very, very important for Israel. Recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, recognition of Israeli sovereignty in the Golan Heights, defunding the Palestinian Authority's various arms, leaving UNESCO, which was something that I worked on myself. And maybe the two biggest ones for me, other than the Jerusalem one, is pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, which was huge for Israeli defense. And also one that's like not often listed, but I think is very important, is something that is called the Pompeo Doctrine, which recognizes Jewish rights in Judea and Samaria in America's view of international law. So these are humongous, humongous achievements. Under the Obama administration, we felt like we were dealing with a kind of enemy, a sister, an enemy combatant that was trying to undermine us. And at the very last moments of the Obama administration, we got slapped with a horrific Security Council condemnation, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the nuclear deal with Iran, which our prime minister saw as extremely dangerous. So for those reasons, and because really we don't live in the United States, we don't have all these problems of all the other issues that are being discussed or in the United States itself. For us, it was pretty obvious, and majority of Israelis see President Trump as very good for Israel and very good for the Middle East. Even the New York Times today had an article basically saying, well, you can't deny that there are achievements that President Trump has had in the Middle East. But spell out for me what a Trump victory would look like, and maybe really the other side, which is not unlikely, which is a Biden victory. What's the difference exactly?
Well, look, you hit the nail right on the head. I'm the president of the Israel Allies Foundation. In 2015, we made a list of the top 10 things that America could do for Israel. Our goal as an organization was to get one done over the next 5 years. Donald Trump in the last 3.5 years has done 9 of them. Each one of those ones that you mentioned, and you mentioned the majority of the 9, is a sea change in how Israel and American relations work together. And all of those have been condemned by the State Department, by diplomats, by career politicians. They said that moving the embassy to Jerusalem would cause blood in the streets, that recognizing sovereignty in the Golan Heights would cause U.S. embassies to be blown up in 22 Arab countries around the Middle East, that pulling out of the Iran deal would actually cause more terror. And in fact, the exact opposite happened. Now, what we're looking at on the other side of this is if Donald Trump loses, is a Biden presidency. Now, I don't think Biden is an enemy of Israel by any means, but you can't deny that the Obama doctrine, when it comes to Israel, was something that was very scary for all Israelis. And it was very scary because what they said is that the problem in the Middle East is the Israeli-Palestinian fighting. And if we can solve that problem, we can bring peace in the Middle East. Well, what's the solution then? The solution is Iran. By empowering Iran and making them a superpower in the Middle East, we can bring peace by bringing people together. Now, obviously, this didn't work. It ended up bringing a lot of death and destruction. It caused the Arab Spring, or the Arab Winter, as you call. I think about 2 million people died in the Middle East, all of them Muslims, almost all of them Muslims, died in the Middle East because of this, in Syria and Iraq and Lebanon and Yemen. So now we have a Trump administration saying, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. The problem in the Middle East is actually Iran, and that we need to fight Iran. The solution in the Middle East is Israel. And by empowering Israel, we can bring about real peace. And so those are two very conflicting doctrines. And one of them works, and one of them is a disaster. And as we know, that if Donald Trump loses, and this isn't a secret, the other side said they're going to go back to that Iran deal, and they're going to go back to empowering the Muslim Brotherhood here in the Middle East. That's a disaster for us.
So Iran is definitely a factor, and there's another factor, I think, which is the encroachment of China. And I had Michael Duran on the show, a fabulous intellectual and an analyst of geostrategic situations. And he talked about the encroachment of China into the Middle East region through Pakistan, through Djibouti, through bases in the region, and through their project, the Belt and Road project, and really an encroachment of their presence in this region, the purchasing and the management of various ports. And it seems like I would even say the only person on the planet who's interested to stand up to China and to kind of keep the world a balanced place is President Trump. I don't think that you're going to see the same thing under a President Biden. And that's something that also concerns me about the polarity of the world and who's going to give the moral tone for how this globe looks like. Is it China, which is going to be gathering every bit of information on all of us and creating kind of a super Borg type universe, or is it going to be the ideas of freedom and liberty?
Well, I think you're bringing up a very big difference again between the Biden administration and the Trump administration. So the Biden administration believes that America doesn't need to be a superpower. What we need is a global world. And that, in fact, America being a superpower is an impediment to world peace. And that if America will just take a step back and let other countries get involved with things, then we could bring about a peaceful situation. Okay. Well, unfortunately, in that model, then there's countries like Russia and China that disagree and say, well, we're not going to play by those rules. And then they become very aggressive. Trump's policy is peace through strength, to borrow the quote from Ronald Reagan. And peace through strength is, no, we're the big guys in town. We got the money, we got the weapons, and we're going to call the shots, and we're going to keep everyone in line. Now, in Israel, this is very important, Dishai, and you started by saying that this is an Israel show. This all affects Israel. So in Israel, you'll know that when we're weak, what happens? Buses start blowing up. We start trading land for peace in the idea. We start releasing thousands of terrorists and hoping that will bring about peace. When you're weak, you have nothing in Israel. When you're strong, what do we get? We just saw it. We get the Abrahamic Accords. When you're strong, we get real peace. We get our Jerusalem recognized. We get the Golan Heights recognized. We get peace with the United Arab Emirates and Dubai. So again, this is a huge difference in outlook, that when you're strong, big things and important things happen, especially in our neck of the woods. The next administration is not going to push an American first, American superpower strength policy. And that's going to embolden actors like Iran, China, Russia, and other global actors around the world that aren't going to play by those rules.
You know, on Twitter, which is a place I like to play, I've been pushing very hard the Abraham Accords. And it's not fake. I really do feel that the Abraham Accords, this flourishing of relations between the UAE, Bahrain, Israel, and really tacitly Saudi Arabia. That's, whoever doesn't understand that is missing part of the component, which is Saudi Arabia is a player here. It might be a silent partner with other issues, but it's obviously playing along. And to me, this is huge. It's just a huge moment and a huge achievement. It's not just the achievement of President Trump. It's achievement of many years of quiet diplomacy. It's also other factors, which is basically that oil is not any longer the sole propriety of the Arab world. They understand that America's an oil power. And they also, the UAE and others like them, are very afraid of Iranian hegemony and Iranian power. They're afraid of Iranian power much more than Netanyahu and Israel's afraid of Iranian power. They're really, really afraid of Iranian power, and other factors. But one of the things that has happened is that through the Israel, UAE, Bahrain Accords, it has become clear, as you kind of mentioned at the beginning, that the Palestine issue is not the main issue stopping progress in the Middle East. In fact, it's pretty clear that the Palestine issue has been sidelined. It's been sidelined very much. And that's why they're screaming bloody murder. And that's why they're issuing fatwas against allowing UAE Arabs to pray on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And they're going crazy about that. But the point is that there's been a sea change. And according to Professor Kedar, who was on the show, he said the UAE is desperate to make sure that Trump wins as opposed to Biden, because they are the ones who are really afraid of Iranian power, Iranian aggression against Sunni Arabs who control the Arabian Peninsula.
Look, what you're saying is 100% true. This is an incredible victory for people who love peace. And the reason is because this is the first time we've actually seen in the Middle East real peace. This isn't like we're buying peace or we're bribing a country with land or water in order to get some sort of document that says peace. This is, we're giving peace, we're getting peace. And it's not just at the leadership level, the people are making peace. There's all those sentiments of love from the people of the United Arab Emirates and from Israel. We're flying back and forth. We already started doing trade and shipments, and they're waving Israeli flags. We're waving their flags. That's what real peace feels like. And I think for a lot of Israelis, it's really like weird to them. Where did this come from? Now, of course, we have to give a lot of credit to Prime Minister Netanyahu. He always said that you don't have to give land for peace. In fact, giving land for peace is actually a problem, because then you can't make real peace. You can't buy peace. At school, if you give the bully your lunch money, the next day he's going to want your lunch money. That's not real friendship. You got to make real friends. And so what we're seeing here is that this is the first time we have real peace. Well, it's exactly what I said before. The reason we have real peace is we're strong. They're worried about Iran. We can defend them against Iran. We can take out Iran in a couple days if we need to. They know that. And they also know that maybe they can't count on America. They saw with the Obama administration that America turned on them. So maybe they need another friend that carries a big stick, and that's Israel. So it's all related. But when Israel's strong, you can actually develop peace in the Middle East. When you're weak, this would never happen, ever.
Josh, so far, everything that you've said has made a lot of geopolitical sense. You're talking about peace for peace as opposed to, and strength for peace, or peace through strength. You're talking about principles of political science. There's different schools, but so far it's a rationalist school. But a lot of your work is actually not in that field exactly, but rather in a related field, but a different paradigm of political thinking, which is what you call faith-based thinking, faith-based diplomacy, faith-based policy, which means biblical policy. And really your book, Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel, is really much about believing the Bible, believing about the promises of the Bible, making policies based on the promises of the Bible, believing that the Jewish people have been ingathered by God, and that the Bible is a controlling document, if you will, in this region. And you turn to global Christians and also American Christians, and you say to them, hey, follow the dreams of the Bible, follow God's word, and that will lead us to good policies that will, bring great things into this world. And it's not always the rationalist world that you're turning to, but a more faith-based world. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the book, Titus, Trump and the Triumph of Israel, starts with Titus. And the reason we start with Titus, and Titus was the general that destroyed the Second Temple, is because when Titus destroyed the Second Temple, he declared victory over the God of Israel. He said, that's it. We won. It's over. And he was so excited about that victory that he actually built the largest infrastructure project of the time, the Arch of Titus. You can actually see it in Rome today. It's this monument. It's the first arch ever constructed for victory in war. Since then, there's the Arch of Triumph and many other arches around the world for victory in war. But the actual Arch of Titus depicts the actual Roman soldiers carrying out the menorah from the Temple Mount, the artifacts, carrying the Jews into captivity. Well, he was so excited. Why? Because he said, look, I beat the God of Israel. Paganism won out. That's the end of the Jewish people. It's the end of the story. I won. But people who knew the Bible knew that that's not the case. It's not true. In fact, that was the beginning of the fulfillment of prophecy. We knew that we were going to get kicked out of the land of Israel and spread out to the far corners of the earth and made a curse among the nations. But we always held to the idea that one day God would bring us back to the land of Israel and reestablish us as a people. The same thing's happening in Israel today. If you don't look at Israel through a biblical lens, you can't understand the story. See, the reason all those people, for all those years, 70 years in the State Department, thought that land for peace was the right way, and that by moving the embassy to Jerusalem since 1995, even though they passed the Embassy Act, by moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in America would bring bloodshed, and that recognition of the Golan Heights would cause strife in the Middle East. The reason they thought that is because they only looked at the whole Middle East through a geopolitical lens. Donald Trump supporters are Bible-believing Christians. They support Israel because of the Bible. They take their biblical support for Israel and they turn it into real political action. That's faith-based diplomacy. So they knew that these steps wouldn't actually bring war, it would bring peace. And that's the whole beauty of it. Donald Trump is acting biblically correct, not politically correct. And because of it, we're seeing peace.
People, that scares a lot of people, My listeners, I think, mostly can deal with it. But I know that there are many Jews that you talk like that the way you're talking, which is like these people are following the Bible will bring peace. It's like, and then they get all nervous about Christians trying to convert Jews, and they get all nervous about that stuff. Your whole life is dealing with these people and finding their, getting them together on policy issues based on the Bible. So how do you explain it to like Jews and non-Jews who get scared off by this thing?
Look, I think they just need to open up the Tanakh and read it. If you're Jewish and you don't know that there's going to be a time when the nations are coming up to Jerusalem paying homage to the God of Israel, or that the God's going to send a message to the nations and they'll carry back our daughters in their arms and on their backs, or that 10 Gentiles will lift up a Jewish person by his tzitzit, then you didn't read the books of the prophets. I mean, it's not my fault. I knew this was going to happen. I studied with Rabbi Ben Elon, Alev Shalom. This was part of the prophecy that we believe is going to happen as Jews. We knew this time was coming and that we didn't have to stand alone. And now we finally have friends. Now it's scary, I understand, because we've always been alone. We've always been a nation apart. We've always had to stand alone. But we're in a time where there are other people who believe in the Bible who are standing with Israel. And I'll tell you another thing about it is that they're getting beat up pretty bad for it. Okay? Christians are being murdered in the Middle East, in Africa and Asia, way more than Jews are. Hundreds of thousands of Christians are being slaughtered just for being Christians here. And no one's speaking up for them also. And I think that's also a tragedy. So I think that people need to either say, look, I don't believe in this stuff, and so that shouldn't bother them anyways. Or I do believe in this stuff and understand what you believe in. I think that one of the best comments Ron Lauder once said at an event that we had was that Christians not only believe in the Bible, they've actually read it. And I think that unfortunately, a lot of us haven't actually read the Tanakh or the books of prophets, understand that all this was foretold. This isn't like, I didn't come to this by, oh, I'm a really smart guy and I'll work with Christians. This is something that we knew that was going to happen.
Josh, speaking of Ron Lauder, recently on Simchat Torah went to visit so-called President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah and talked again about a two-state solution. That was not one of my favorite moments. It was both disrespected the Sabbath, the Simchat Torah holiday, and also empowered this arch terrorist who also suppresses his own people. I was not happy with Ron Lauder's action there. But I understand
agree
very
100%.
much.
That was a disgrace.
It was a disgrace. I understand very much what you're saying about faith-based diplomacy and faith-based policy. And I do have, I had a Christian friend of mine who said to me, look, I vote on 3 issues: birth, marriage, and Israel. And I was like, wow, I was glad to make it into that. And really, he said exactly like you said. That I am motivated by these by biblical faith. But I wanted to ask you. You said that Christians are on the run in the Middle East. But I wanted to ask you: do you see a future? Do you see the trend in the United States such that this kind of thinking is flourishing? Or is it on the run? It's so hard to understand when you watch from here. When you watch America, you sense such a division, such divisiveness. It's not clear to me. Like, where is it all going? Is it the and there's all these terms against liberals and against the conservatives and the hicks and the deplorables and the white trash and it's become so it's hard to really understand where this kind of what you're saying. It's just so foundational. Something that's so basic, something that like the love of the Bible, understand that when you read the Bible and you love it, you realize that Israel's the hero, the protagonist of the Bible, even with all the problems that Israel makes. That very basic idea that like the Bible is part of our lives. It's a moral backbone. It's a compass for how we act and how we think. Is that something that's growing as a trend, or is that going away?
So that's the $1 million question. I mean, everyone's saying that, oh, the millennials are less supportive of Israel than their parents, but they're misdiagnosing the problem. See, people who believe in the Bible, doesn't matter what their age are going to stand with Israel. The millennials are less supportive of Israel, not because they're Christians and they don't like Israel. It's because they're not Christians. So what's happening in America is that the next generation is a lot less religious than their parents' generation. And so we're seeing a decrease in the younger populations for support for Israel. It's a trend that's actually happening across all religions. The number one growing religion in America today is atheism. Atheism is on the rise in ways that people never imagined just 20 years ago. Okay, so as that happens, there'll be less support for Israel. But what's interesting is that at the same time that's happening, Bible-believing Christianity is growing in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, in Eastern Europe, in numbers that no one ever thought would happen. If you look at Brazil, for example, okay, there's 180 million people in Brazil today. In 1948, everyone was Catholic. Okay, everyone. There were pockets of voodoo, but mostly, almost 99.9% were Catholic. Today, 35% are Bible-believing Christians who love Israel. Now, that's 60 million evangelical Christians, 35% of 180 million. Okay, that's the same amount of Christians that are in the United States of America. There are 60 million evangelical Christians. So at the same time that the numbers are going down in America, they're growing in places like Latin America and Africa and Asia. And that's why we're seeing embassies being moved to Jerusalem from Guatemala and Honduras and Malawi and places like that, because if you just match it up to where their populations are majority Bible-believing Christian, you'll see a big movement towards standing with Israel. It goes hand in hand. It's Christians, not countries, that are standing with Israel. And people need to understand that. That's why faith-based diplomacy is so important. That's why it's the most important weapon Israel has in its diplomatic arsenal. Because as Ruby Rivlin said when he was the Speaker of the Knesset in 2004, there's 13 million Jews and there's 1 billion Christians, but together we're 1,013 million. And that's the power of faith-based diplomacy. We have 600 million Bible-believing Christians around the world that are standing with Israel. And it's a secret. People don't know it, but they're finding out slowly as we see support come through political action.
And do you find that the Israelis that you deal with are cynical about that, like use it because it's a political strength? Or do you think that they themselves also embody like biblical principles, like Rabbi Benny Alon, who was a politician, but also a rabbi, and also with outreach towards the Christian world? Do you think that like people are using it in a, like, are they internally embodying being those biblical people? Or is it something kind of that they say and use and kind of smile inside and say, okay, those folks are religious, but okay, maybe that if it works, it works. But inside they haven't converted in their heart into being Bible people themselves and running policy in a biblical way.
Look, it's a mixed bag. Okay, so in the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, we have 19 members from 7 political parties, left to right, religious to secular. Everyone from blue and white and Yesh Atid all the way to Shas sit in the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus. Okay, so the majority of people are in it because they're just happy that people
you have Shas members in, yeah?
Sure, Yaakov Marty has been a member since the establishment. We have people from every party. Look, the majority of people are in it because they're like, we're just happy to have friends. These people have to deal with our enemies all the time. There's actually people that like us, and so when you have friends, we should talk to them. We should see what they want. We should see how we can do. One of the most active members of the caucus ever in our history was Ron Cohen from Meretz. All right, so it's not a political thing. It's, we have to work together. These are our friends. Let's see how to get together. But I also have to say, and you must feel this too, living in Israel, even the most secular Israeli knows why we're here. Even the most secular Israeli, even the ones that will eat bread on Passover, are happy that it's illegal to sell bread on Passover. I don't know how to explain it, but it's there. You can't be in Israel without having some connection to the Bible and the God of Israel. So even if they don't internalize it or speak about it that way, it makes sense to them. It's a language they understand. They can talk to Christians and understand where they're coming from because maybe they don't believe that, but their grandparents did, or their great-grandparents, in that the Bible is a real thing. Their grandparents prayed 3 times in the direction of Jerusalem for a reason. Okay, so even if they may not believe it today, there is that resonance there, and I think that comes through in our work, and we see it more and more.
Josh Reinstein, you're the head of the Allies Caucus. I had the great pleasure of hosting one of your delegations, one of the big conferences that you ran here in Jerusalem, and you brought leaders. That's when I really got to see you in action. You brought leaders from all over the world, parliamentarians from countries all over the world, with all different colors, all different folks, all different flags, and you brought them to Israel, and you had a day trip to Hebron, to the Tomb of the Patriarchs and Matriarchs, and it was really eye-opening and moving. And I think that one of the cliches that like Israel doesn't have a lot of friends out there, you're proving wrong through your work. And your latest book is called Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel, which is really about the power of faith-based diplomacy, but also it's got a lot of history and it touches a lot of issues, including Jerusalem, the conflict between Islam and Judaism over Jerusalem, and other topics, BDS and others, that are very enlightening, written in a way that really get people to understand the big picture. I would say this is a big picture book, and it has Trump in the title, and it's got elements about the political battle in the United States right now, but it's got a lot more. You could have put a different title on it, and it's really evergreen because it's got a lot to teach people as a basic primer also for really how to think about politics in the Middle East and how to move forward towards peace through faith. I mean, instead of just saying peace through strength, it's really peace through faith. Josh Reinstein, you're the director of the Israel Allies Caucus and the Christian Allies Caucus in the Knesset. I want to thank you so much for being with us here on the Yishai Fleischer Show.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Yishai. And I just want to say, if we have a minute, that trip to Hebron is really a microcosm of what's going on. Because what I did was I bring politicians everywhere in Israel. I don't stop them from going anywhere. It's a fact-finding mission. I want them to see it for themselves. I want them to see the history. I want them to see the legal rights, but I also want to see what's happening on the ground, not what they're saying in the news. So I take them everywhere. I take them all over. You know my trips very well. We work together on a lot of these type of things. But when we got there, what really shocked me was these members of parliament were dancing and singing. You saw them. They were dancing and singing in Hebron, celebrating that they got to see Abraham's tomb. And I think that's really the crux of the book. Legally, we have all the rights to be in this land. Politically, we have more rights than any people to be in this land. Archaeologically, we have the proof that this is our land forever. But all those things pale in comparison to our biblical rights to the land. And I think that's what we've been missing. When people see that we are here, liot kan chofshi, to be free in our land, in Eretz Zion, Jerusalem, I don't think that's something that people want to mess with. And that's why they always try to move it to the political realm. This is our land and we're here to stay. And I think that when we give that message clear, a lot of people come and support that. And that's why I appreciate what you do, Yishai, and it's great to be on the show because I think that you get that message out there probably better than anyone else in Israel.
Thank you, Josh. And we do have actually a question. I'm putting it up right on the screen. I was gonna let you go, but finally, Stuart Federo threw out a question, which I think is a challenge to the things you're saying, and I wanted to give you a chance to respond to it, and I wanted Stuart to be heard as well. He says, but do we sell our Jewish souls for the Christian support of Israel? Do we welcome into Israel those who are coming to Israel to missionize our people here? Do we allow the massive amounts of money these Christians are giving to Israel when they're buying favors? Okay, and I'm really glad that Stuart wrote that because that is the counter concern.
Well, I think that's a great question. The answer is absolutely not. We don't want to work with people who want to kill us spiritually to fight people who want to kill us physically. All right, that's not the goal. But this relationship is built on real trust, real mutual respect for one another. And we deny any relationship with any organizations that's involved with missionary activity. And that's also the policy of the government of Israel. So I would just say that you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. The majority of Christians today that are standing with Israel are doing so because they believe God commanded them to stand with Israel, not because they believe that they need to convert Jews to Christianity. Now, there's always those who do believe that, and we have to be vigilant. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we can't be friends with anyone. And I always like to take the position, a lot of the people who are against working with Christians have no trouble going on Al Jazeera and meeting with Yasser Arafat and shaking his hand at the White House. But I think that's a huge mistake. I think when people put out their hands in friendship, you have to work together with your eyes open and see how we can really bring a better world for both our people.
Josh Reinstein, thank you. That was a great answer, I think, and a fair answer. And that doesn't mean that Stuart's concerns are just going to, be in one shot. He'll accept that and he'll feel all safe about that. I know there's a lot of worries about that, but I have seen myself the fruit, and I have seen also that it's very, very easy to tell when a person is trying to scam you and trick you and convert you and all that. It's just very easy to tell. It's very easy to tell when a person wants to actually be part of the redemptive process of the Jewish people coming back home to the land of Israel and actually wants to, in any way, hold on, in a sense, just hold on to that great thing that's happening and be part of it. Not so much to buy it out, but rather to buy in a ticket to be part of this great show. Josh Reinstein, thank you so much for being with us. And again, your great new book is called Titus, Trump and the Triumph of Israel. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Shai, for having me on the show.
All right, folks, you are listening to the Yishai Fleischer Show here on all three, on Facebook, on Twitter, which is really Periscope, on YouTube, and on the Land of Israel Network, I guess, 4. I want to thank you so much for being with me here today. It's so much fun to broadcast to you and to hear folks from all over the world. And there's Stuart, who asked that really good, tough question. He writes, thank you, Yishai. And I appreciate that you asked that question, and that's in the end what the show is about. It's really about airing out these concerns, and I can see by some of the other comments here that yeah, for sure, this is a feisty issue, and I want to hear what you're thinking about this issue of global Christian support for Israel. I also want to hear what you think about the Trump election, and I'm just going to give you my 2 cents, which is if you can vote, I say vote for Trump if you care about Israel. With regard to America, I really don't want to comment on that, although I think it's probably better for America as well, but that's just not my department. My department is Israel, and I think that we've seen great things being achieved in the last term, and I hope that we'll be able to see more great steps. I would have asked Josh, if I had him on some more, I would have asked him, what would be, let's bring him back on for a second. Let's see if he's still on. Are you back there, Josh? Yeah,
I'm still there. I'm not going anywhere.
You know what, Josh? One more question quickly here. A second Trump term, what would be some of the bucket list things that you would like to see happen? Is there something that you'd like to see happen if Trump would be empowered again for another 4 years.
Absolutely. I think the number one thing is sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. I think that we will get sovereignty with Donald Trump. I think it's very important that we continue. I think that a lot of people have misread what's happening today with this whole Abrahamic Accords instead of sovereignty. Many people may not understand this, but diplomacy never happens in front of the camera. It always happens behind the scenes. And I think there's a lot more going on than people understand. I think we get both. I think we get more peace with Arab and African countries, and we get sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. And then we start to have a real frank discussion about, what is this whole idea about two-state solution? It doesn't work. Where do we go from there? So I think it's very exciting where this thing is heading right now. And I believe that a second term for Donald Trump is a very positive thing. And also one of the things that we mentioned before, I think Iran gets crushed. And I think that the only existential threat that Israel really has today is a nuclear Iran. And I think that is really the number one issue right now. And so I think that if you care about Israel, if Israel's your issue, then I think it's really a no-brainer. I mean, I don't say vote Republican or Democrat, but I can easily say that you should support Donald Trump, because Donald Trump has done things that no Democrat and no Republican has ever done before for the state of Israel.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Josh Reinstein, thanks again for joining me, and thank you folks out there wherever you are. Write me an email, yishai@yishaiflesh.com or yishai@thelandofisrael.com. Stay connected, stay tuned, and remember, vote for the right things, but remember, never give up your most important right to vote, which is to what we did just now, which is to crown the king, which is the God of Israel, and he is broadcasting 24/7. All you have to do is tune in. Josh Reinstein, thanks again. Shalom.